gravity bombs, but they have a cheap addition to them that has proven extraordinarily effective. It's called a JDAM, a Joint Defense Munition. And what it does is it puts a tail fin on the bomb, as well as give it laser or GPS guidance. So it becomes very accurate. And the U.S. has many of those, and that's what I think the Israelis are getting from this purchase, which is actually much smaller than some recent purchases. I think the Israelis want to have the same number of bombs as is the U.S. now that they can use these less expensive weapons. But the problem is actually in where your package focus, which is on the more expensive, exquisite interceptor systems, the Patriot and variants thereof. And those are in limited supply. Many have been used in Ukraine. Last June in the war, the Gulf states are now using them extensively, and the U.S. and Israel need them. So I think that's going to be the focus of production. That's perhaps what President Trump meant when he said quadruple.
Wouldn't that have been something considered before, though?
This has been an issue for the past 5 years at least, even before the Ukraine war. It's I think the focus of the day's meeting or yesterday's meeting that President Trump had was to try and build up the production, which will take months, perhaps a year, primarily so that then the Pentagon's more confident taking the reserves it has and using them now, knowing that there'll be was foreseen. And the production is as maximum as possible. But the U.S. and NATO dismantled much of their arms industry, at least in this area, during the Cold War. And then it was a focus on counterterrorism, so making protected personnel carriers and so on. Only recently have they gotten back into the business of these large-scale conventional wars. So, yes, it was a problem that was foreseen, but it is a problem.
All right. Thanks very much for your time and sort of breaking some of that down for us. Richard White there.
Thank you for hosting.
Right, you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran, and I'm Sarah Khairat. The Israeli military says it's begun another wave of strikes targeting Iranian infrastructure in Tehran. Missile attacks have been reported across the Iranian capital. Earlier, the White House said its objectives in Iran should be met within 4 to 6 weeks. That's after Donald Trump said there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. Right now, these are the latest pictures coming in from Lebanon. There's been clashes along the Lebanese-Syrian border near the Nabi Shit area. Fighters are attempting to repel Israeli incursion attempts. Israel has been striking the area and other parts of the country for several days now. Iran has launched another barrage of missiles at Israel. Waves of strikes over the last week have caused extensive damage in Tel Aviv. At least 11 people have been killed in Israel since the conflict began. Now, Washington's goal as it wages its military campaign against Iran has included explicit calls for regime changes from the US. Donald Trump says the Iranian people should rise up and take over, but experts say a fractured opposition with no military might behind it faces uphill odds, rather. Heidi Jo Castro has more from Washington.
Since the 1979 founding of the Islamic Republic and the hostage crisis that saw the seizure of U.S. embassy workers in Tehran, Iranian leaders have been clear one after another, America is their enemy. Now, after U.S.-Israeli strikes killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, President Donald Trump says he wants unconditional surrender from Iran and the selection of a great and acceptable leader, he says, that he helps to choose.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen.
The slain leader's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, appears to be the frontrunner as Iranian clerics meet to make a selection. That's the very scenario Washington is hoping to avoid. Meanwhile, Trump has downplayed the possibility of installing Reza Pahlavi, the U.S.-friendly former crown prince of Iran, who has lived in exile in the U.S. since age 17.
Iran's nuclear military program will end. Support for terrorist groups will cease immediately.
Pahlavi says he would lead a transition to a democracy, but critics warn he has no governing experience and no ground organization in Iran.
Some people like him, and we haven't been thinking about too much about that. It would seem to me that somebody from within maybe would be more appropriate.
Experts say the U.S. will have little influence over the choice of Iran's next leader without sending ground troops. And the U.S. invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan failed to establish stable new governments at a cost of hundreds of thousands of civilian lives and more than 7,000 U.S. military deaths. That is a price Americans say they do not want repeated as U.S. casualties mount from the growing conflict with Iran. In fact, in national polling, 3/4 of Americans say that the country should be cautious of regime change wars. And they point to Donald Trump's campaign promise to avoid long military conflicts abroad. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
European unity is under strain as the latest conflict in the Middle East escalates. Some EU countries have backed the US and Israel's mission against Iran, while others are openly against it. European governments are struggling to find common ground and balance support for their allies, and along with the public's fear of being dragged into yet another war. Natasha Butler reports from Paris.
It was in the Oval Office on Wednesday that divisions in the European Union over the war in Iran were thrown into sharp relief. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, praised by the US President for supporting Washington's mission, remained notably silent while Donald Trump lashed out at a fellow EU country, Spain, because Madrid refuses to allow the US military to use its bases.
But some of the European, like Spain, has been terrible. In fact, I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain.
While Merz says Berlin supports the US and Israel's goals, Spain's Prime Minister took the opposite stance.
In short, the Spanish government's position can be summed up in 3 words: no to war.
Divisions over the conflict are also apparent at the top, with mixed messages from EU leaders in Brussels.
And this means a credible transition for Iran.
While the head of the EU Commission has appeared to call for regime change, the bloc's foreign policy chief is cautious.
The diplomatic track, the European Union and Gulf foreign ministers met today to discuss what we can do together to break the cycle of escalation.
Without a clear and united EU position, European countries are taking matters into their own hands. France has criticised US and Israeli airstrikes as violating international law, but Paris is allowing the US military to use a base in southern France for logistics operations. Portugal, Greece and Italy have also offered the US their bases for support purposes only. Once again, the European Union is being shaken by a war beyond its borders and failing to come up with a common response. But despite their differences, there is one thing the European governments do agree on, and that is that they don't want their countries to be drawn directly into this conflict. Most opinion polls in Europe suggest entering the war would be unpopular with the public. A drone strike on a UK base in Cyprus on Tuesday heightened anxiety. Several European countries, including France, are now sending ships and defensive equipment to the region, conscious that a war that most Europeans don't want is coming increasingly close to home. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
European nations are trying to boost defences in Cyprus after a drone attack on a British base in the country's south. The Mediterranean island is a member of the European Union and the first one to face a direct strike in the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. John Stropoulos has more from the base RAF at Kratiri.
We know that the British base here has been on high alert since overnight Sunday to Monday, when a drone actually hit a hangar, the only time the base has been hit this week. And John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, was here yesterday to announce that 400 additional personnel are being sent to the base to secure it, also being sent Wildcat helicopters, being equipped with Martlet drones to shoot down, Martlet missiles, to shoot down drones, and next week the HMS Dragon, a destroyer. But there is still great unhappiness on the island with the fact that these British sovereign bases here are attracting risk. And we spoke to a governing party MP yesterday who told us that the government doesn't believe that the British can secure the island. Much more than that, they don't believe the British can secure their bases entirely. And they do eventually, not during the present crisis, want a renegotiation of the status of these bases.
US, European and Asian markets have closed this Friday with losses. That's because they've been rattled by American and Israeli attacks on Iran, now entering a second week. Crude prices have surged. That's as concerns mount about oil supply disruption. The international benchmark, Brent crude, had $92.69. That's per barrel, the highest since 2023. That's up nearly 30% this week. The US crude oil futures are also up more than 12%. And US stocks tumbled across the board on Friday. If you take a look at that list there, you've got the S&P 500 fell by more than 2%. The Nasdaq declined 1.24%, while the Dow's weekly loss of more than 3% was its biggest since early April. And Asian markets are also experiencing their heaviest losses in years. South Korea's Kospi suffered a massive drop of nearly 12% on Wednesday, forcing authorities to temporarily halt trading. It finished the week down 10.56%. And the Nikkei experienced its worst weekly performance in 11 months, ending the week down more than 5%. Well, Kristen Salumi has the latest from the New York Stock Exchange.
U.S. investors are seeing red as oil prices continue to rise. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed on Friday down 450 points. That's about 1%. It was the worst week the stock index has seen in nearly a year. And the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, also much lower on Friday. Fuel prices are mainly what's driving down the markets, with no end in sight to this conflict in the Middle East, which is disrupting global energy trade, global energy supplies. We've seen Brent crude topping $92 a barrel. The West Texas crude at $90 a barrel on Friday. That's a 12% increase in just one day for the West Texas crude, and a 35% increase over the last week, just to give you a sense of how much these prices are rising. That's the highest the West Texas crude has been since 2023. All of this as investors try to find some positive news to keep them in the markets. President Trump's comments, however, that he would not reach a deal with Iran unless there was unconditional surrender, again raised the question of how long this conflict will go on, with Qatar's energy minister also saying that production might have to come to a complete halt in the Gulf if the conflict continues. All of that weighing on investors. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Well, as we've been reporting, US and Israeli strikes on Iran have triggered a spike in global oil prices. The countries across Southeast Asia that depend heavily on imported fuel are already feeling the economic pain. Myanmar is particularly hard hit. That's as a 5-year civil war has already left the economy in tatters. Jack Barton has more.
In Myanmar's largest city, Yangon, long queues to buy whatever fuel is left. It can take up to an hour and a half to reach the pumps, where there are limits on how much people can buy.
If the station is only selling $14 worth of fuel per person, we fill the $14 and then we go to another station. And if we have time to wait, we fill some more. We have to collect fuel little by little like that.
The US and Israel's war with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil and gas shipping lane, have sent global prices soaring. And Myanmar imports 90% of its fuel. Some service stations have already closed.
Because of the commotion, everyone started buying fuel in panic. There was still stock in the afternoon, but by evening, the gas stations that were selling just shut down.
The knock-on effect of inflation is likely to push up transport and food costs for millions of people already living on the edge after 5 years of civil war. The military government has implemented a rationing system based on license plate numbers in the parts of the country it still controls. but has not indicated how much fuel has been stockpiled or when it will run out. Jack Barton, Al Jazeera.
A hotel in the capital of Iraq's Kurdish region has been targeted in a drone attack. The strike in Erbil comes just hours after a warning by the US Embassy in Iraq. It said Iran-backed armed groups will likely target hotels frequented by foreigners in the city. Iran has also carried out strikes against what it calls separatist groups in the Iraqi region. Assad Beg has filed us this report from the outskirts of Erbil in northern Iraq.
There's been a series of strikes taking place across Iraq. There's been airstrikes targeting the Jurf al-Sukhr area. We believe that's the headquarters of the Popular Mobilization Forces, a group aligned with Iran. No casualties are reported there. At the same time, there were 2 Katyusha rockets fired at the Taji military base. And again, at that base, we believe they are US forces. Now, the United States Embassy in Baghdad has warned its citizens that they believe Iranian-aligned groups were planning to attack hotels in northern Iraq, here in Iraqi Kurdistan, and urged its citizens to leave as soon as they could, and if they were going to stay, that they should reconsider their lodging options. Now, tonight, we heard a series of explosions here in Erbil. Now, what we can tell you is that a hotel courtyard was hit by a drone strike. We understand that that drone was intercepted and it caused a fire. Now, that hotel is believed to house foreigners as well as possibly US soldiers. Now, at the same time, there's been a series of strikes targeting Iranian Kurdish groups. Now, northern Iraq is home to a number of Iranian Kurdish groups who are opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, US President Donald Trump has said that he would like to see these groups mount a ground operation, and it's been widely reported. Now, those groups, their camps have come under attack, their headquarters have come under attack, communication towers have been attacked by Iran, as well as Iraqi-based groups aligned to Iran. Now, we visited some of these camps to see the damage that has been caused by drones and missiles. Now, there's an alliance of 6 parties of these Iranian Kurdish groups. Now, we spoke to some of them, and we went to one group in particular and spoke to its leader and started off by asking him if his group had started a ground operation or planned to do so.
At this moment, no. We are not currently engaged in any offensive operations. We have been planning for a long time, and now that conditions are more favorable, there is a strong probability of action. We have yet to reach a decisive decision, but it is highly likely we will move forward with a ground operation. The Americans have contacted us through various channels, but until now we have not met directly, but they contacted us. They asked what we should do with this regime, what are the ways, and talking if we can cooperate together in the future.
In Lebanon, many of the people who have become internally displaced have ended up on the streets of central Beirut, sleeping in their cars or even out in the open. Bernard Smith reports from the Lebanese capital.
Hussein al-Shukif shows us what happened to his car as they fled Israeli shelling on their border village in southern Lebanon, with shrapnel raining down. With an aunt Amina, his son Ali, and wife Hoda, the family have spent the last 3 days travelling north, sleeping in their 2 cars that are packed with everything they could carry.
I went to get my car and there was an airstrike. We barely made it out. We stayed on the road for more than 4 hours, moving a little at a time. In the end, we slowly kept going, and then an airstrike happened right in front of us. Thank God it didn't hit us. I had just recovered from the shock when another strike happened behind us.
Like tens of thousands of others here, they have nowhere to go and no money to pay for a hotel or apartment. The government has handed over this stadium in Beirut to a charity that hopes to accommodate 5,000 people. Volunteers are learning how to put up the hundreds of tents that will shelter the displaced.
The main challenge now is preparing this area quickly so people can come in. It is not acceptable for people to remain on the streets for 4 days. Right now, the site isn't ready. The toilets aren't working. There is no water supply, no electricity, no tents, and nothing on the ground to protect people from the cold and rain.
It's going to be another 48 hours before this place is in an adequate condition to accept anyone. Until then, people sleep where they can. Beirut's Corniche has become a campsite, and the city's public schools opened as shelters.
Everyone here just wants to know when they can go home, but nobody in authority is able to tell them. But there's every indication that Israel's operation in Lebanon may take weeks or even months.
In the meantime, more and more people forcibly displaced from the south need somewhere to go. Hussein's home was flattened by Israeli shelling this week for a second time. He just partly rebuilt it after the last war in November 2024. Only Israel will decide when we go home, he says. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
And from southern Lebanon, Zaina Khadr has more on how people are trying to get out.
We're making our way to the southern city of Tyre. In the early hours of Thursday morning, the Israeli army issued yet another warning for people to leave areas south of the Litani River. As you can see, as we drive through the streets, traffic is very thin, shops are closed. People are worried, especially since there's no end in sight to this latest confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah. Human rights groups have criticized the Israeli army's evacuation order, saying forcing an entire population to leave their homes violates the rules of war. South of the Litani River to the border, this is 8% of Lebanese territory, and hundreds of thousands of people live in this area. The city has already come under attack. Israeli airstrikes targeting what it calls Hezbollah's military infrastructure. We are in the center of the city of Tyre. It was also repeatedly targeted during the last confrontation in late 2024. Attacks like this cause further displacement, destruction. Many people have still not recovered from the last conflict. Many homes, many buildings still lay in ruins. The country is cash-strapped. The government has not been able to help the people. People are poor. Israeli strikes also targeted electricity generators in the city. People here are telling us this is part of a strategy to make the city unlivable and to force people to leave. The Israeli military also targeted Qard al-Hassan branches. This is a financial institution affiliated with Hezbollah. The Israeli military really has been targeting anyone and anything related to Hezbollah. But as you can see, widespread destruction. This used to be a commercial district. So much damage. It is obvious that many have left this southern city. There are still those who have chosen to stay. The question is, for how long? Zaina Khadr, Al Jazeera, Tyre, southern Lebanon.
What started as a conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran has spread far across the Middle East. Juliet Ager takes a look at the countries that have now been impacted by the war a week after it began.
On the 28th of February, the US and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran. Since then, more than 100 cities have been attacked, and at least 1,300 people have been killed, including Iran's supreme leader. Iran was quick to retaliate, launching thousands of strikes towards Israel. One of the deadliest attacks was on the city of Beit Shemesh. But Iran also launched near simultaneous attacks on countries in the region hosting US bases. These are the countries that have been affected so far, and the missile interceptions are still taking place. Some of the attacks have hit US embassies, oil refineries, and even hotels. Then, on the 2nd of March, Hezbollah decided to attack Israel in response to the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And of course, Israel retaliated. The violence has sparked widespread displacement across Lebanon. On the same day, Cyprus reported that a British airbase had been attacked. Several European countries have decided to send naval assets to Cyprus following that attack. Then, on the 4th, Turkey said that NATO air defense systems had downed an Iranian missile that was heading into its airspace. The same day, the US said a submarine had sank an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka, killing more than 80 people on board. The ship was taking part in a military exercise in India and was heading back to Iran. Then, on the 5th, Azerbaijan became the latest country to be dragged into the conflict. Officials said drones had fallen near an international airport. 1 week on, what's clear is that the US and Israeli assault on Iran has spread far across the region.
All right, well, let's bring you some other news from around the world. People in Gaza are facing a shortage of essential supplies. It's after Israel shut border crossings into the Strip. Limited supplies are being allowed through, but it's nowhere near enough, as Hind al-Khodri reports from Gaza City.
Since the Israel-Iran war started, the situation in the Gaza Strip is not getting any better, as the Israeli authorities announced all crossings in and out of the Gaza Strip are closed until further notice. In the past couple of days, only Kerem Abu Salim was open, and only approximately 150 trucks were allowed to enter between aid, commercial, and fuel. And these are definitely not enough for the 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. We also need to know, is the Rafah crossing is completely closed, putting thousands of Palestinians who need urgent medical evacuations to leave the Gaza Strip in risk because the fear of losing their lives. They need medical evacuation as soon as possible. Here, Palestinians are very scared that borders are going to close, they won't have access to food, and they're fearing another wave of famine. Hind al-Khodri, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
For a second day, hundreds of Ukrainian prisoners of war have been released by Russia. This released captive was greeting his mother. The two sides traded another 300 prisoners each on Friday, and the exchange came under a new agreement reached in recent talks in Geneva. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the officers were defending the country's front lines. Torrential rains and heavy floods have inundated towns in Peru's southern Aina district. The Sarcoato River burst its banks on Friday, flooding homes and streets in the city of Ayacucho with mud and debris. Rescue teams have been deployed to the area to assist local authorities. Indonesia has announced a ban on social media and other popular online platforms for under 16s. The measure aims to protect young people from online harm. Indonesia's communications minister announced that platforms considered high risk will be deactivated from the end of this month. Since Australia became the first nation to implement a youth social media ban, several states are considering following suit. A crowd of thousands has gathered in Chicago to pay their final respects to the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. A towering figure of the US civil rights movement. He died last month at the age of 84. Jackson was the protege of Martin Luther King Jr. and a two-time presidential candidate. 3 former presidents, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and Joe Biden, are attending the service in Chicago.
He was a connector of people and a lover of people. He really bridged the gap between all ages because he not only served Chicago well, and we know him as a hometown father to many, but he was globally and internationally loved.
This man here, man, paved the way for so many other people to be able to make a difference in this world.
Everybody should know that how important Jesse Jackson was and how he made an impact in our lives and everybody's lives.
In Nepal, the party of a rapper-turned-politician is leading in at least 2/3 of seats after Thursday's general election. Tony Cheng has this report from Kathmandu.
A day after the election, and counting is still going on all across Nepal. The Election Commission estimates they won't have a proper result for 4 days or as long as a week. And that's not surprising given the geographic complications of this mountainous Himalayan nation. But what we are seeing in the results that have been counted is a very clear shift to the RSP, the National Independence Party. What some people here are calling a blue wave. Now, we didn't have much of a sense before the election because of the tight restrictions the Election Commission put on polling information. That was what we were hearing from people that we spoke to, that they wanted to vote for a change. And the question now seems to be not is the RSP going to win, but by how much? And will they get the 2/3 majority that will allow them to change the constitution? That also suggests that Balendra Shah, the charismatic rapper and former mayor of Kathmandu, could be heading towards the job of prime minister. It also signifies a huge change for politics here in Nepal, with people deserting the traditional parties that have ruled for decades. But it certainly seems to reflect what people told us as they were voting yesterday. That was that they wanted a change. Tony Chang, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
It's just gone 03 GMT. I'm Imran Khan, watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the ongoing conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. Now, the Israeli military says it's begun another wave of strikes targeting what it calls Iranian infrastructure in Tehran. Missile attacks have been reported across the Iranian capital. Earlier, the White House said its objectives in Iran should be met within 4 to 6 weeks. That's after Donald Trump said there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. These are the latest pictures coming in from Lebanon. There's been clashes along the Lebanese-Syrian border near the Nabishit area. Fighters are attempting to repel Israeli incursion attempts. Israel has been striking the area and other parts of the country for several days. And Iran has launched another barrage of missiles at Israel. Waves of strikes over the past week have caused extensive damage in Tel Aviv. At least 11 people have been killed in Israel since the conflict began. Qatar has warned of a dramatic impact of the widening conflict on the global energy market. The Gulf state's energy minister says the violence has the potential to, quote, bring down the economies of the world. Attacks on the region have continued on Friday. Threat alerts were sounded in Qatar and other Gulf nations hosting US troops. US President Donald Trump has commented on the conflict while speaking to the media at the White House on Friday.
By the way, in Iran, we're doing very well. Somebody said, how would you score it from 0 to 10? I said, I'd give it a 12 to a 15. Their army is gone. They're just about, look, their navy is gone. Their communications are gone. Their leaders are gone. 2 sets of their leaders are gone. They're down to their 3rd set. Their air force is wiped out entirely. Think of it. They have 32 ships. All 32 are at the bottom of the ocean.
Now, our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, has more from the White House.
Donald Trump in the Oval Office said that the military is doing a phenomenal job. He, of course, suggested the timescale of somewhere around 4 weeks for this operation. Everyone around the administration seems to suggest that the US is ahead of that timescale. He's talked about an unconditional surrender. Caroline Levitt, his press secretary, kind of gave an outline to that, said either the Iranians announce an unconditional surrender and give up. Most people we speak to think that that's highly unlikely, or they are put in a position because of the US military operation that they can no longer stage any sort of fight back, that they don't have the men or the material to retaliate. Now, Donald Trump says that he wants to be involved in the selection of a new leader in Iran. He says he wants someone who is great and acceptable, someone who will work with the United States and also with Israel, but will also work with his Gulf colleagues. Now, we've heard from the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations saying that isn't going to happen. Iran is a sovereign nation. The people will select their new leader. But it suggests that with the unconditional surrender remark, that this conflict may actually take a bit longer. And that causes a problem. Now, we've heard from sources around Dan Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that perhaps the US military doesn't have enough munitions for an operation that could last much longer than 4 weeks. That's been dismissed by Donald Trump, but he gathered those from the armaments industry at the White House on Friday. They had a conversation and they've committed to quadruple their output over the coming weeks to try and meet the demand from the United States. And this comes as the State Department announces that they've signed a $151 million deal to sell more weapons to Israel, including 1,200 1,000-pound bombs, which obviously could be used in Iran. That suggests that we are going to see this 3rd stage that has been talked about over the last 48 hours or so, which those in the administration say will be a new wave and much more powerful than anything that has happened in the first 7 days in the war on Iran. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
Now, joining us from Tehran is Abbas Aslani, a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. The language coming from the US has been absolutely clear. Donald Trump says unconditional surrender. He says that the Iranians are basically being destroyed one leadership segment at a time. Those statements suggest that there is no room for diplomacy. They seem to be backed up by Abbas Araghchi as well. How are those statements being taken in Tehran?
Well, it seems that Iran is not taking those negotiation offers seriously, and there can be no chance for negotiations as the war is going on, because Iran is seeing the United States as a bad faith actor, attacking the country twice in the middle of the negotiations. The second point is that Iran is not seeing this as a bilateral matter and or battle, and it is somehow seeing a systematic violation of the UN Charter. That's why it is resorting to international community to stop this aggression, and also the chance of a negotiation could be somehow dead on arrival. Why? Because the terms that the United States is setting for negotiations with the United States equals total surrender, which is not the case for Tehran. Iran is saying that it will not negotiate under aggression, and that's why there is no ceasefire in sight, and we are expecting to see maybe a new shape or phase of the conflict in the days or weeks to come.
Well, Abbas Araghchi was very clear about this. He says if the Americans want to come in on the ground, this will be a very different conflict. Here we are, 1 week in, Abbas. Where do you see this conflict heading?
As we are about to enter to the day 8th of the conflict, we are seeing that the exchange of fire yet continues, and there have been some speculations or rumors about, let's say, ground conflict between the two sides, if not direct. But the United States and Israel seem to be mobilizing some Kurdish separatist groups from Iraqi Kurdistan to infiltrate inside the country from western borders. And that's why Iran has been, in the past couple of days, targeting Kurdish positions in Iraqi Kurdistan and sending IRGC ground forces to western part of the country. And this raises the question that maybe the United States is resorting to a new tactic whereby they can bring chaos and instability into the country, in addition to aerial bombardment. It seems that the US and Israel intend to add this new aspect because they think that only aerial strikes cannot meet their needs in the country and achieve their objectives. That's why this is being discussed mostly here in the country or in the neighboring, let's say, sphere. So we have to watch and see that how things will emerge in the days to come. But it seems that at least for some time, this conflict is about to continue.
Now, Abbas, there is a leadership structure within Iran right now. Ali Laranjani, you have on the religious side, you have Arifi, you have Masoud Pezeshkian as well, the Iranian prime minister. Now, where do you see this going in terms of politics? At some point, there's going to be a new supreme leader announced. So just break us down where you see the political leadership going.
Interim Leadership Council is in charge now to lead the country through the transitional period until the time that the Assembly of Experts elects the new leader. This somehow signals continuity in the country. Maybe that's why Trump is not happy with what's going on. He wants to have a say in the election of a new leader, which Iran doesn't take seriously. Iranian officials have been mocking these remarks by Trump, US president. And we have been hearing some speculations about a likely leader, but the point is that the country has lost a leader, high-ranking commanders. maybe this is creating a kind of, let's say, power vacuum in Iran. The longer it takes, it could have consequences. The officials here think that they need to quickly elect a new leader because they need to find a focal point for different factions to unite. And also the chance of, electing a new leader, also the risk of a new assassination against a likely new leader is also is a question. But the point is that the lengthened process of electing the leader and a continued vacuum, its danger could be more than the assassination. So that's why we are also hearing from the members of the Assembly of Experts saying that they want to do it as quickly as possible.
Abbas Aslani there, live for us from Tehran. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Now, Iran has launched a series of attacks on Israel in the past few hours. Rory Challens is following developments from Oman, and he joins us now from the Jordanian capital. It's very difficult to get information out of Israel about the size and scale of the attacks simply because of the military censor them. But those attacks are still continuing.
Yeah, and Israel's right in the midst of one of those missile barrages at the moment. From where I'm sitting here in Jordan, I could hear the distant thump, thump, thump of Israeli air defense trying to challenge that barrage coming in. We understand that the targets were all in the central Israel area, and that's the second wave of Iranian missiles that have come in overnight. A few hours ago, there were similar attacks. We heard of sirens being set off and explosions in the sky over Tel Aviv. One of those missiles, it looks like, was a cluster munition. The Iranians said that they had launched one such thing. It's one of their Khyber Shikan missiles, which have been in operation since 2022. It's a pretty sophisticated medium-range ballistic missile, which has a maneuverable warhead when it comes down in its terminal trajectory. It opens up and about 20 submunitions come out of it. Each of those has about 2.5 kilos of explosives in them. So you can see that that's probably quite a destructive weapon if it gets through. The Israelis have said, though, that no injuries have been reported from that earlier round of missile strikes. And there haven't been any reports of significant property damage either. One of the missiles, we're being told, fell into open ground. Another one was intercepted. But what the Iranians are doing, clearly, they've been launching wave after wave of missiles all across the country, all across Israel, from the north to the south over recent days. They're showing essentially that even though they've been under massive barrage from Israel and from the United States for a week now, that the US Pentagon has been saying it's been hugely successful, well executed, properly planned, fully punishing air attacks against Iran. Iran is showing that it still has the capability and the capacity to hit back. It still has missile launchers. It still has missile stockpiles. And it can do these wave after wave of rockets. And that's what it's showing by keep on doing this. And also not just Israel, of course, the wider region, as we've seen.
That's Rory Challens there live for us from Amman. Now back to reports of clashes along the Lebanese-Syrian border near the Nabi Chit area in the Bekaa Valley. Heidi Petz live for us in Beirut. Hezbollah saying that there's been fierce fighting in the Bekaa Valley area. Just bring us up to date.
Yeah, so those reports of fierce fighting from Hezbollah have been confirmed to Al Jazeera this evening by locals in the Bekaa Valley. What we understand is the Lebanese Ministry of Health has confirmed that 3 people were killed and 16 injured in airstrikes that went on before and after those clashes. And so we've seen a statement in the last hour or so from Hezbollah with their account of what went on in the valley this evening. They say that earlier on Friday evening around 10:30 p.m., they detected 4 Israeli helicopters coming from the east, so from the direction of Syria, that landed a group of commandos inside Lebanon, about 70 kilometers from the Israeli border we're talking about. So it's a significant distance from Israel and a significant expansion of their operations on the ground here in Lebanon. They say it took that group of commandos about an hour to reach the outskirts of a town called Nabi Shit. And once they reached the cemetery on the edge of that town, they were engaged by Hezbollah fighters. And you will have seen videos, and we've got accounts from locals of very, very heavy clashes and fire and exchange of bullets in the town of Nabi Shit. Hezbollah says that their artillery units were also involved and that they targeted the Israelis while they attempted to evacuate. We're waiting on any official statement from the Lebanese army or indeed from the Israeli side about exactly what went on there and indeed what the aim of that operation so far inside Lebanese territory might have been. But it has resulted in very, very heavy airstrikes across the Bekaa Valley, both during that operation, afterwards, and of course, earlier in the day, the Bekaa was experiencing a large number of airstrikes, which may have been an attempt to soften the ground there. We saw a forced evacuation order for the town of Nabi Shit earlier on Friday afternoon as well.
But it's not just southern Lebanon. It's not just the Bekaa Valley as well. It's also happening right now in Beirut. Take us through what's happened today.
Yeah, so yesterday we saw very heavy airstrikes across the capital in the southern suburbs. Multiple parts of the Dahia, as it's collectively known, were targeted by airstrikes. It's actually been reasonably quiet overnight. There haven't been significant airstrikes here in the last few hours on the capital. However, in the south of the country, we have seen strikes this evening and ongoing clashes between Hezbollah, and they say that they have been, again, directly engaging with Israeli forces on the ground inside Lebanese territory. And also there has been a number of incidents of projectiles, so whether that's rockets or drones fired into northern Israel, as well as anti-tank fire. And we had earlier on Friday, the Israeli military saying that 5 of their soldiers were seriously wounded and another 3 lightly wounded as a result of fire from Hezbollah into northern Israel.
That's Heidi Pett, their live for us from Beirut. Now, Iran is continuing to target Gulf nations hosting US troops. Saudi Arabia says it's intercepted 6 drones after an attempted attack on Aramco's Sheba oil field. The oil field is located in a scarcely populated desert region in the east of the country. Now, the US, European, Asian markets have been rattled by American and Israeli attacks on Iran, and this is now entering a second week. Crude prices have surged as concerns mount about oil supply disruption. The international benchmark Brent crude has jumped to 92.69 per barrel, and that's the highest since 2023. That's up nearly 30% this week. The US crude oil futures are also up more than 12%. US stocks finished in the red for a second straight week. The S&P 500 fell by more than 2%, and the Nasdaq declined 1.24%, while the Dow's weekly loss of more than 3% was its biggest since early April. Now, the Asian markets are experiencing their heaviest losses in years. South Korea's Kospi suffered a massive drop of nearly 12% on Wednesday, forcing authorities to temporarily halt trading. It finished the week down 10.56%, and the Nikkei is experiencing its worst weekly performance in 11 months, ending the week down more than 5%. Now, Peter Maguire is Australia's Chief Executive Officer at Trading.com and joins us from Sydney. You've just heard the report there from the markets, a lot of volatility. But the White House seems to be saying, well, that's only short term. It will recover. However, attacks on energy infrastructure are a very dangerous escalation, right?
Absolutely. And what we've seen, as you mentioned, over the last week has just been absolutely one-way traffic. And with Brent now trading above $92, and you've got West Texas Intermediate on the NYMEX, that was up over 12% for the session on Friday. It's cracked nearly $91. So the move to the upside is immense, and oil prices are up nearly 33% since going back a couple of weeks back.
Now, Qatar's energy minister has been very clear about this. He's actually said that this could tank global economies. Do you think that's a fair assessment from him?
Well, it naturally impacts as far as supply chains, and we all understand the Strait of Hormuz and what happens as far as restricting energy to countries and then the vying for that energy. Yes, it does have a dramatic impact as far as global economy and GDP. we've got to work through this over the next week or two. Inflation naturally will start to pick up. But the other side, of course, is how long does it take for countries to get back on? And, well, I read the papers as far as LNG out of Qatar, and they're saying it will take many months to get back to those supplies.
But in a weird way, isn't that pressure on the energy infrastructure exactly what Iran wants? Because it feels like if it can do that, then if you hit people in their pockets, they are more likely to try and end this conflict quicker.
You would think so, and there is a strategy behind that, and that makes a lot of sense if you're looking through the lens of Iran, and that could well be the case. As crude prices edge closer to 100, there will be an inflection point, and whether the Americans and certainly Israelis are prepared to walk away from the table and say that's it, or does the pressure start to mount? And in war, no one knows the actual outcome until when you look back in retrospect. So we've got to get to that point, and it's going to be a very interesting matter of, the next few weeks leading up to the end of the month.
Do you think the markets are reacting to, then, Iran's strategy or the fact that Donald Trump doesn't really have a clear strategy? Or is it, a mixture of both?
Well, I think it's a mixture of both. I think the markets and market sentiment, we're looking as far as US equities, and they've certainly taken a leg down. US dollar index has jumped up, bond rates are up, and naturally the energy market. So gold's been very, very quiet if you're looking just volatility, but it's still where it is now, where it was this time last week. But energy prices are one-way traffic, and I feel as though 100's going to be on its radar this week, and we may well be there by midweek.
Peter Maguire, thank you so much for breaking all of that down for us.
Thank you.
Now, US and Israeli strikes on Iran have triggered a spike in global oil prices. Countries across Southeast Asia that depend heavily on imported fuel are already feeling the economic pain. Myanmar's particularly hard hit as a 5-year civil war has already left the economy in complete tatters. Jack Barton has more.
In Myanmar's largest city, Yangon, long queues to buy whatever fuel is left. It can take up to an hour and a half to reach the pumps, where there are limits on how much people can buy.
If the station is only selling $14 worth of fuel per person, we fill the $14 and then we go to another station. And if we have time to wait, we fill some more. We have to collect fuel little by little like that.
The US and Israel's war with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil and gas shipping lane, have sent global prices soaring. And Myanmar imports 90% of its fuel. Some service stations have already closed.
Because of the commotion, everyone started buying fuel in panic. There was still stock in the afternoon, but by evening, the gas stations that were selling just shut down.
The knock-on effect of inflation is likely to push up transport and food costs for millions of people already living on the edge after 5 years of civil war. The military government has implemented a rationing system based on license plate numbers in the parts of the country it still controls, but has not indicated how much fuel has been stockpiled or when it will run out. Jack Barton, Al Jazeera.
Now, fires have broken out at facilities of 2 US oil firms in southern Iraq after a drone attack on Friday. Multiple drones were fired at a compound in Basra. It contains employee residences as well as offices and warehouses belonging to US firms Halliburton and KBR. Basra is Iraq's main oil hub in the south and hosts numerous international energy companies. And a hotel in the capital of Iraq's Kurdish region has also been targeted in a drone attack. The strike in Erbil comes just hours after a warning by the US Embassy in Iraq. It said Iran-backed armed groups will likely target hotels frequented by foreigners in the city. Iran has also carried out strikes against what it calls separatist groups in the Iraqi region. Al Jazeera's Assad Baig filed this report from the outskirts of Erbil in northern Iraq.
There's been a series of strikes taking place across Iraq. There's been airstrikes targeting the Jurf al-Sufr area. We believe that's the headquarters of the Popular Mobilization Forces, a group aligned with Iran. No casualties are reported there. At the same time, there were 2 Katyusha rockets fired at the Taji military base. And again, at that base, we believe they are US forces. Now, the United States Embassy in Baghdad has warned its citizens that they believe Iranian-aligned groups are planning to attack hotels in northern Iraq, here in Iraqi Kurdistan, and urged its citizens to leave as soon as they could, and if they were going to stay, that they should reconsider their lodging options. Now, tonight, we heard a series of explosions here in Erbil. Now, what we can tell you is that a hotel courtyard was hit by a drone strike. We understand that that drone was intercepted and it caused a fire. Now, that hotel is believed to house foreigners as well as possibly US soldiers. Now, at the same time, there's been a series of strikes targeting Iranian Kurdish groups. Now, northern Iraq is home to a number of Iranian Kurdish groups who are opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, US President Donald Trump has said that he would like to see these groups mount a ground operation, and it's been widely reported. Now, those groups, their camps have come under attack, their headquarters have come under attack, communication towers have been attacked by Iran, as well as Iraqi-based groups aligned to Iran. Now, we visited some of these camps to see the damage that has been caused by drones and missiles. Now, there's an alliance of 6 parties of these Iranian Kurdish groups. Now, we spoke to some of them, and we went to one group in particular and spoke to its leader and started off by asking him if his group had started a ground operation or planned to do so.
At this moment, no. We are not currently engaged in any offensive operations. We have been planning for a long time, and now that conditions are more favorable, there is a strong probability of action. We have yet to reach a decisive decision, but it is highly likely we will move forward with a ground operation. The Americans have contacted us through various channels, but until now we have not met directly, but they contacted us. They asked what we should do with this regime, what are the ways, and talking if we can cooperate together in the future.
Now let's bring you some other news. People in Gaza are facing a shortage of essential supplies after Israel shut border crossings into the Strip. Limited supplies are being allowed through, but it's nowhere near enough. Hind Khodari reports from Gaza City.
Since the Israel-Iran war started, the situation in the Gaza Strip is not getting any better, as the Israeli authorities announced all crossings in and out of the Gaza Strip are closed until further notice. In the past couple of days, only Kerem Abu Salim was open, and only approximately 150 trucks were allowed to enter between aid, commercial, and fuel. And these are definitely not enough for the 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. We also need to know, is the Rafah crossing is completely closed, putting thousands of Palestinians who need urgent medical evacuations to leave the Gaza Strip in risk because the fear of losing their lives. They need medical evacuation as soon as possible. Here, Palestinians are very scared that borders are going to close, they won't have access to food, and they're fearing another wave of famine. Hind Khodari, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
Now, for a second day, hundreds of Ukrainian prisoners of war have been released by Russia. This released captive greeting his mother. The two sides traded another 300 prisoners each on Friday. The exchange coming under a new agreement reached in recent talks in Geneva. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the officers were defending the country's front line. Now, torrential rains and heavy floods have inundated towns in Peru's South Ana district. The Sarquihuato River burst its banks on Friday, flooding homes and streets in the city of Ayacucho with mud and debris. Rescue teams have been deployed to the area to assist local authorities. And Indonesia has announced a ban on social media and other popular platforms for under-16s. The measure aims to protect young people from online harm. Indonesia's communications minister announced that platforms considered high risk will be deactivated from the end of this month. Since Australia became the first nation to implement a youth social media ban, several states are also considering following suit. In Nepal, the party of a rapper turned politician is leading in at least 2/3 of seats after Thursday's general election. 35-year-old Blender Shah was the mayor of Kathmandu, and his popularity has surged since a youth-led uprising toppled the government last year. Tony Cheng reports from Kathmandu.
A day after the election, and counting is still going on all across Nepal. The Election Commission estimates they won't have a proper result for 4 days or as long as a week. And that's not surprising given the geographic complications of this mountainous Himalayan nation. But what we are seeing in the results that have been counted is a very clear shift to the RSP, the National Independence Party. What some people here are calling a blue wave. Now, we didn't have much of a sense before the election because of the tight restrictions the Election Commission put on polling information. That was what we were hearing from people that we spoke to, that they wanted to vote for a change. And the question now seems to be not is the RSP going to win, but by how much? And will they get the 2/3 majority that will allow them to change the constitution? That also suggests that Balendra Shah, the charismatic rapper and former mayor of Kathmandu, could be heading towards the job of prime minister. It also signifies a huge change for politics here in Nepal, with people deserting the traditional parties that have ruled for decades. But it certainly seems to reflect what people told us as they were voting yesterday. That was that they wanted a change. Tony Chang, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
A crowd of thousands have gathered in Chicago to pay their final respects to the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. A towering figure of the US civil rights movement, he died last month at the age of 84. Jackson was the protege of Martin Luther King Jr. and a two-time presidential candidate. Three former presidents, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, are attending the service in Chicago. Now, that's it from me for now, but I'll be back at the top of our with our extensive coverage of the ongoing conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. The news continues here on Al Jazeera after counting the cost.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rishad Salamat. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, energy supplies in the Middle East are being choked off. Refineries in the Gulf are under attack, and shipping in the Strait of Hormuz has ground to a halt. As the conflict in the Middle East escalates, how high could oil and gas prices go? Higher energy prices feed into the global economy. A prolonged conflict in the Middle East could reignite inflation. What does that mean for consumer spending and business investment worldwide? For the Gulf and the wider Middle East, the impact cuts both ways. Higher energy prices could boost revenues, but instability threatens investment and tourism. So how resilient is the region? Iran is retaliating to Israeli and American strikes where it hurts most: energy, and the world is already feeling it at the pump. Tehran has disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. It's a narrow waterway through which a fifth of all global oil flows. It's also launched a series of counterstrikes across the Gulf targeting oil and gas facilities. Any further disruption to that flow would cripple the world's largest importing economies right the way from East Asia to Europe. Oil and gas prices are climbing, and that means higher fuel costs for cars, power plants, and industry, rippling through the global economy. So what happens if this conflict is a prolonged one? And what are the risks for the Gulf, the wider Middle East, and the rest of the world? Victoria Gatenby reports.
The conflict between Iran, Israel, and the United States is striking at the heart of global energy production. Saudi Arabia's largest domestic oil refinery at Ras Tanura has been shut down following drone strikes. In Qatar, Iranian drones hit the Ras Laffan complex and Mesaid industrial zone, disrupting liquefied natural gas production. Explosions were reported on Iran's Haag Island, which handles around 90% of the country's crude exports, and companies in Iraqi Kurdistan and at Israel's Leviathan gas field have also suspended output. At the center of the crisis is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but vital waterway linking the Gulf to global markets. Around 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through it, much of it destined for Asia, including China, India, Japan and South Korea. Iranian officials say the strait is now closed.
Our heroes in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Navy and the Army will set fire to any ships that try to pass through the strait. We'll also target their oil pipelines in the region, and we will not allow oil exports from this region until we put pressure on the enemy.
In response, President Donald Trump said the U.S. Navy could begin escorting vessels through the strait. But Iran's threat is already sending shockwaves through shipping and insurance markets. Some insurers are sharply increasing premiums or cancelling coverage altogether for vessels attempting the journey. In Washington, the Trump administration says it has a plan to respond.
This terroristic regime, led by radical clerics, has the ability, potentially, to shut off 20% of global energy. That's the kind of leverage they have because of their Navy. We're going to destroy their Navy.
China, meanwhile, has urged restraint. It buys more than 80% of Iran's shipped oil.
Energy security is very important to the world economy, and all parties have a responsibility to ensure the stable and smooth flow of energy supply. China urges all parties to immediately cease military operation.
OPEC Plus has agreed to raise output quotas next month by just over 200,000 barrels a day. Analysts warn that sustained disruption could drive up fuel costs worldwide, adding to inflationary pressures and raising fears of a broader economic slowdown. For consumers, that could mean higher prices at the pump. For energy-dependent economies in Europe and Asia, the consequences could be severe, possibly resulting in soaring inflation, weakened currencies, and the risk of recession. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
The price of global oil benchmark Brent crude hit more than $83 a barrel on the 5th of March, while that of liquefied natural gas surged by 30% and up to 50% in parts of Europe. Analysts say oil prices could pass $100 a barrel if disruption to shipments continues, and that could add 0.6 to 0.7 of percentage points to average global inflation. And that's because the price of oil pushes up the costs of almost everything from transportation to prices at the pump, manufacturing, and logistical costs across the economy. For example, every $10 a barrel increase in the price of oil typically raises gasoline prices for American consumers by 20 to 30 cents a gallon. Shipping costs are rising too. Hiring a supertanker to move oil from the Middle East to China hit a record of more than $400,000 on the 2nd of March. And that's almost double the cost from the week before.